I was looking at your logo and I was talking about Ybor City.
Yeah.
And so my company, I have a PR firm. We were in downtown for 30 years and we're still supporters of downtown. But I saw what was about to happen in Ybor City, and that Ybor City was becoming the cultural, creative, innovation center of the region, really. And I decided to move my company to Ybor City. When I got to Ybor City, I started looking at the icons of Ybor City, and the natural one is to use the rooster. You never really understand a culture until you start to ask people who are there. And it turns out that the residents of Ybor, now it's not the people who had lived there in the 50s, now they're new residents,
Yeah.
but they are the Ybor City residents. They strongly object to the rooster as a symbol.
Huh.
And the reason is they don't like to have the roosters wake them up in the morning.
Yeah. Yeah. They're a little biased, right? That we don't have to deal, if you don't live in Ybor, you don't have to deal with the cock-a-doodle-doo in the morning.
So it's like when I lived in Asia, I could always tell when an art director had just moved from the US or UK because they would put chopsticks in their ads or some other icon of Chinese or Asian culture. Sometimes they would put fortune cookies, which weren't even invented in Asia. They were invented in San Francisco. And it's the same thing here with the rooster in Ybor City. I'm trying to still learn 4 years later the different aspects of culture in Ybor and how people think about Ybor.
Well, the roosters, all the chickens in Ybor are the descendants of the chickens that people kept like over 100 years ago when those immigrants first came to Ybor City.
Well, there are people that love the chickens. There are protection societies. There's a group that helps injured chickens. In Jose Marti Park, which is behind my office, there's a family where there are like 5 chickies that have been born, and my staff watch them every day to make sure they're safe. And they've named them and they
That's
take
hilarious.
videos of them.
People are passionate. People are
Yeah.
very protective of those little
So the
creatures.
chickens definitely are, and the roosters are an icon of Ybor, and they're important historically. But it's just interesting. You have to know how different audiences within a culture react to different symbols.
Well, everyone has different opinions on everything, right? That's kind of the beautiful thing about this country is people can make their voice heard and argue, and there's debate and dialogue, and eventually there's a solution. And in the city of Tampa, aren't the chickens protected in some way? Like there's an official city
In Ybor,
code.
in Ybor at least. I'm not sure about the rest of the city. But
And
yes.
do you know what exactly they're protected on? Like you can't harm them, you can't mess with them. Essentially,
I don't
is
know.
what it is.
I don't remember exactly.
In
You
Ybor
you
City?
definitely can't kill them. I don't think you're allowed to scare them, maybe even. But think about when you're looking at the culture of a community, how do you approach development or redevelopment in a sensitive way?
Yeah.
So Ybor City is a historic district. Many of the old buildings have been torn down, and Daryl Shaw rolls in. He did a smart thing, and I'm a big fan of his. I think he has a great vision. He, he bought his first building in like 1988, and then it fell down. And so he went into business with his brother, made a lot of money, and came back. Now he's implementing his vision. So he has this long history with Ybor. And he got the right people. He got the Capitanos, the Bookmans, and others, the Guayardos to support him. So he became partners with many of the old families that were in Ybor. And they put their assets together. They started buying land. But then you have to figure out, what do we do with it? You could build shiny, new style office buildings, but instead he worked to try to build buildings that were like what Ybor might have been like at the turn of the century 100 years ago.
Yeah.
And the one he's just done on the corner of Nuccio and 7th, when it's finished, I think it's almost finished. When it's finished, the bricks and everything, it will look like it's 140 years old.
You're talking about Casa Marti and Casa Gomez.
Yeah, and the other thing he did is he named he has a business partner named Ariel, who's a Cuban-American,
Right.
and he's a fan of Cuban history. And the history of Cuba and Tampa, Ybor are intertwined. We say the kids of Tampa grow up learning the history of Cuba, and the kids in Cuba grow up learning the history of Tampa. And so Ariel has come up with a whole naming system where the buildings are named after famous Cuban figures.
Right. Yeah. Marti and Gomez were 2 of the figures. Pedroso. Yeah, I've heard a lot about Ariel. I'd love to reach out to him and get him on the show.
Do you know that nobody will be able to see this, but when you talk about the history of Tampa, the logo...
Show it here. I'll put it in the camera right here.
The logo of Tampa, I have that on my city phone, so I remember which one it is. But the logo of Tampa has Cuba in it. That's how important. Do you know what that is?
That's the mascot. That was a ship, right? Henry Plant's ship.
So this is one of the steamships and it's not an actual depiction of the real ship, but this is representative of a steamship that used to go back and forth to Cuba. We had regular service from Tampa to Cuba back in the 1890s, and if you were from New York or somewhere in the north and you wanted to go to Cuba, you would have to take the train to Tampa, and then you would take the steamship. That's why Teddy Roosevelt and the others came here. And so because of that, a who's who of everybody came through Tampa. But the other thing is that we think that the history of the U.S. and Cuba is in Miami, but it's not. It's in Tampa.
Right.
We were the center of trade with Cuba in the United States when Miami was a little fishing village. There was nothing there. And do you know when Ponce de Leon landed, 1513, he landed somewhere on the East Coast, like St. Augustine or Melbourne. Do you know where he sailed from?
From Spain, you're saying, or from where?
He was the governor of Puerto Rico. So he was exploring the Northern Territories, and we know there were other explorations, and for sure the indigenous people went back and forth. But he sailed from Puerto Rico to what's now the United States. He put the flag down somewhere on the East Coast of the United States. Do you know where the first ship that left Cuba and landed in the United States, where did it land?
I'm gonna guess Tampa, Florida.
One more guess.
St. Augustine. Where?
St. Petersburg.
St. Petersburg.
So there's an area called Coffee Pot Bayou, and the way that they know that it's there is that there's an Indian burial mound, and we know from the records of this the Narvaez expedition. If you go to the History Center, you can see the video about this. That they took over an American Indian camp and settled there. They didn't stay very long, and most of them were ultimately killed. But anyway, the first recorded ship that left Cuba and landed in what's now the United States landed in the Tampa Bay area was in St. Pete, not Tampa.
Yeah. Wow. That's wild. I didn't know that. That's all this history and some of those cultural connections are so important moving forward in the way our city grows and development. I love how you connected. It all starts with culture, right? Think if Daryl came here, bought a bunch of land, didn't want to talk to anyone about his plans and wanted to do some sort of modern vision that was completely outside of the respect of the history of our city. Many people would be against it. People would be rallying, and they would be in the city council meetings talking about, we don't want this man to come in here and turn this place into Miami, right? Or whatever they would say. It all starts with culture. It's what makes a place unique and special. Hey guys, if you want to watch the full episode of this clip, click right here. Make sure to subscribe by clicking right here. Thank you for watching.